Okay, so have you ever felt like really big decisions were happening, but it was all behind this wall of jargon? You know it's important, but trying to figure out what it all means is just too much.
Right, like it matters, but who has the time?
Exactly. So that's kind of what we're doing today, breaking down one of those walls. We're doing a deep dive on a huge ruling from the Supreme Court of India. It came out on Wednesday, April 8th, 2025. And this one matters because it really gets into how laws get made in India, like the whole process. We're specifically going to be looking at the power of a state governor, under Article 200 of the Constitution.
Yeah, think of it this way. You got a blueprint for a new building.
Okay.
That's like a bill that's passed by the state legislature.
Right.
So then the governor is the one who has to sign off on those plans.
Before anything can happen.
Exactly. Before you can even start construction. So what this Supreme Court ruling does is it lays out what that sign-off process should look like. And more importantly, it clarifies if a governor can just, sit on those plans forever.
Just kind of stalls everything.
Yeah, basically. So what we're going to do today is break this down. We're going to pull apart the legal stuff and make it clear. What does it all mean? How are things supposed to work between a state government and the governor?
Because that's the big question here, isn't it? Can a governor just completely stall a bill? It just sits on their desk and nothing happens. It's like sending a letter and it just disappears.
We'll right into a black hole.
Exactly. So the Supreme Court had something to say about that. They clarified exactly what a governor can and can't do when a bill lands on their desk.
Absolutely. So under Article 200, the Constitution gives the governor 3 options when a bill from the state legislature shows up. Option 1, they can give their assent.
So they sign it, it becomes law.
Exactly. Option 2, they can say no thanks, withhold their assent,
Okay.
and they have to send it back to the legislature, usually with some suggestions for changes,
So like edits.
basically.
Mm.
And then the last option is in special cases, they can reserve the bill for the president of India to look at.
So it goes up the chain.
Right. And what the Supreme Court made clear is that just doing nothing, that's not one of the options.
No sitting on it.
Nope. They actually said inaction is not an option. Pretty powerful statement.
Wow. Yeah. So this brings us to this term pocket veto. Have you heard of that before?
I have.
Basically, someone in power just delays acting on a bill until the legislative session ends.
So it just dies. Never really gets rejected.
Right, just fades away. Like you're hoping a problem will just disappear if you ignore it long enough.
Yeah, like maybe it'll just go away.
Mm-hmm.
But the Supreme Court said, nope, not going to happen. Not for governors anyway.
Yeah, they shut that down.
They did. And they pointed to this tiny phrase in Article 200, as soon as possible. It seems like a small thing.
All right, I'm just being polite.
But the court said, no, it's a constitutional expectation. Governors can't just delay forever. It goes against everything in that article. All the democratic principles.
Mm.
The elected legislature, they debated and passed the bill. That's their job. And the governor has specific actions they can take. Silence isn't one of them.
Right, they have to do something. So to really understand why the Supreme Court got involved here, we need to look at what happened in Tamil Nadu. The legislature, they sent 10 different bills to the governor.
10.
Yeah. And these weren't new bills. They'd already been sent to the governor once.
That he's seen them before.
Exactly. He sent them back with notes, his concerns. The legislature went back, looked at them again, maybe made changes, maybe didn't. But they passed them again and sent them back to the governor.
Oh, so they were serious about these bills.
Yeah. It wasn't just a first draft. So at that point, the governor had fewer options, but instead of signing them or rejecting them again this time, the governor decided to reserve all 10 for the president.
Wow, all 10.
Yeah, and that's when the Supreme Court said, hold on, this isn't right. They said the governor in Tamil Nadu was overstepping his bounds.
So what did they do?
They didn't hold back. They called it an erroneous exercise of power. That's pretty serious coming from the highest court in the country.
Yeah, no kidding. So they must have done something pretty big to fix it.
They did. So the court understood that this could cause huge problems. If a governor could just keep sending bills to the president, especially after the legislature had already looked at them again, it would basically stop the whole system from working.
Just gridlock everything.
Exactly. So to fix this, the Supreme Court, they used a special power. It's under Article 142 of the Constitution.
Okay. I'm not a legal expert, but that sounds powerful.
It is. Think of it like the do whatever it takes for justice clause, when the normal rules aren't enough.
So like a trump card.
Kind of. And
Yeah.
they used it to say that those 10 bills were considered assented to from the date that the Tamil Nadu legislature passed them the second time.
So they bypassed the governor completely.
Basically, they said those bills were law.
Wow. So they sent a message that the governor had to respect what the legislature decided. But didn't they do more than just fix that one situation?
They did, because part of the problem was that Article 200, it didn't have any deadlines, so the Supreme Court decided to set some.
Make sure this didn't happen again.
Exactly. So now governors have to follow a timetable. It's pretty straightforward. If a governor wants to withhold assent or reserve a bill for the president and they're following the advice of the State Council of Ministers, they have 1 month.
1 month.
But if they decide to reject a bill and send it back to the legislature and they're going against the advice of the council, then they've got 3 months. And they have to give their reasons for rejecting it.
So more time if they're going against the council.
Right. And it's the same if they want to reserve a bill for the president, but they're going against the advice of the council. 3 months for that, too.
Okay, that makes sense. What happens if the legislature sends a bill back a second time, like after making changes?
Then the governor only has 1 month to sign it. Or else.
Or else what?
Well, the Supreme Court made it clear that if a governor doesn't act within these deadlines without a good reason, it could mean judicial review. So the courts could get involved.
And potentially force the governor to make a decision.
Right. So now there's accountability. Governors can't just delay things forever.
This is really interesting because it all goes back to the relationship between the governor and the state government. We always hear about the governor acting on the advice of the Council of Ministers. How does this ruling fit into that?
It definitely reinforces that idea.
Yeah.
The governor isn't supposed to just do whatever they want. They have to listen to the elected government.
And this isn't a new concept, right?
No, it goes way back. There was a case in 1974. Shamsher Singh. The Supreme Court said that in most cases, governors, they're more like figureheads. They're not the ones making the big decisions.
Right. They represent the central government, but they're not calling the shots.
Exactly. But there was a more recent case, B.K. Pavitra. Some people thought it gave governors a bit more power to decide when to reserve bills. But this new ruling clarifies things. The governor can only reserve a bill in specific situations. And those situations, they're all laid out in the Constitution.
So no going rogue.
Right. And they can't just disagree with a bill personally and send it to the president, especially if the Council of Ministers says they shouldn't.
So in the end, this is about protecting the will of the people. Right. The people who voted for their representatives in the state legislature, making sure one person, the governor, doesn't have too much power.
Exactly. Because the governor wasn't elected by the people in that state, and they're not directly accountable to them.
Right. They're appointed by the president. So they represent the central government.
So this ruling, it's about making sure the governor doesn't become a roadblock. And it all comes down to the role of the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. They're the ones who make sure that everyone follows the Constitution.
Yeah, Supreme Court, they're like the referees.
Exactly. So this idea of judicial review is really important here. The Supreme Court, they can step in and look at what the governor is doing. They can even tell the governor what to do.
That's a lot of power.
It is. But it's there to protect the system, to make sure that the legislative process keeps working, that the people's voices are heard.
So let's recap. What are the big takeaways here?
Okay, so first, governors have very specific responsibilities. And they can't just ignore bills or delay things forever. Second, they have to listen to the elected government, the State Council of Ministers. They can't just do whatever they want. And third, the Supreme Court is there to make sure everything stays fair. They set deadlines for governors, and they can step in if those deadlines aren't met.
So for our listeners out there, why should they care about all of this?
Well, imagine your state government passes a law that affects you directly. Maybe it's about schools or health care, or even just fixing those potholes in your street. This ruling means those laws can't just get stuck because the governor doesn't like them.
It's about making sure the government works for the people.
Right. It's about making sure things actually get done.
So the Supreme Court is trying to balance things out, making sure the governor follows the Constitution while also respecting the independence of the state legislature.
It's a delicate balance. So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about this. What do you think will happen in the long run? Will this ruling change the relationship between the national government and the states? Something to think about. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.